According to 1 Chronicles 11, when King David and his army were battling against the Philistines, he and his men made a strong encampment in a cave. The Philistines had made their camp in a surrounding valley as well as having some soldiers in the town of Bethlehem. This was a very insecure and uncertain time for David and his soldiers. As they sat in the cave, unsure where the road would lead them and how things would turn out, David began to think about the way things used to be. He started thinking about his hometown of Bethlehem, where he was raised and where he grew up, where he spent his time, where he shepherded those sheep outside of the city in surrounding fields. And as he thought of his hometown and thought of the simpler times back then, much simpler than the time he was currently finding himself in, he began to think about a well. And the well was located by one of the gates there in Bethlehem. And as he thought about that well that he went to often to draw water from, to drink, to perhaps give to the sheep that he was shepherding, he just kind of longingly said, "Oh, how I wish I could drink water from the well at the gate in Bethlehem." As he said those words, they were overheard by a very elite group of soldiers called the Three. Now don't let that simple name fool you. It was incredibly difficult to be counted among the three. How difficult? Well, there was one soldier who killed 300 people, 300 enemy soldiers, with one spear. He was not good enough to be one of the three. They were a seriously impressive group of soldiers. When they overheard their king making this proclamation of his longing for that water, they decided to do something very sacrificial, loving, and caring for him. They snuck out of the cave. They fought their way through enemy lines. They walked miles through enemy territory, leading them to Bethlehem, where there were more enemy soldiers, and they went to that well. The well that David had spoken of in the cave, and they took water from it. And then they fought their way back, again, through enemies and through front lines and crossing dangerous passages until they could get back to the cave. And when they got there, they presented the water to their leader. David took the water, but he didn't drink it. Instead, he began to pour it on the ground. All of it. He didn't drink a single drop. To quote one of my favorite characters from one of my favorite TV shows, David, what is going on here? What is happening? Why would David do such a thing? His soldiers had been so willing to care for him in such a phenomenal and sacrificial and dangerous way, and yet when they present him with this gift, he takes it, he doesn't drink it, he just pours it out on the ground. What is going on here? Well, as is often the case in Scripture, there is more to the story than what we may understand with our modern eyes and modern ears. You see, there was a tradition back in the day. It wasn't practiced very common, but it was a tradition called a drink offering. And a drink offering was something that was poured out before the Lord as a sign of honor of the sacrifices that people have made and a sign of God's presence and victory in various moments throughout the people's journey. For example, we're told that when the Israelites were heading into the Promised Land, God told them to give a drink offering. An offering that represented God's presence and God's victory and God's deliverance of them into that promised land, the fulfillment of the promise that God made. But a drink offering wasn't just about what God was doing in the midst of God's people. A drink offering also lifted up and honored everything that the people had put into that journey. So for the Israelites, every step that they had taken, every risk that they had undergone, every ounce of faith that they had shown, all the suffering, all the lives lost, everything that happened in that journey from their bondage in Egypt to their freedom in the Promised Land, all of that, in that act of making a drink offering, everything they poured out was, in essence, poured out with that drink offering, which made their efforts sacred. In the Apostle Paul, when he talks about living the Christian life, he says that a Christian life is a life poured out for the sake of the gospel and for the sake of God. So when David's men see him doing this act, pouring out that water in a drink offering to God, they understand what's going on. You see, David knew the risks that they had taken. He knew everything that they had done to take that journey and to bring him that water, to offer him that comfort. And what they had done was so sacrificial, so loving, so caring, that it was too much for David in a selfish act just to drink that water. Instead, he took their journey and made it sacred. He poured out that water on the ground, and in so doing, everything that they had done was offered as a sign of faith to God. It really was a powerful moment. There was no more powerful thing than that David could have done in that time. And in essence, what David is doing in the midst of tremendous uncertainty, David is demonstrating a faith in God. David is turning this situation over to God. David is saying to those who witnessed this event, remember that no matter where this journey takes us, if every step we take, if every effort that we make, if everything that we do is done in the right spirit, if we pour ourselves out in faith as we take this journey, if we offer it to God, God's going to make the journey sacred. You see, a drink offering represents the fact that not only do we see God's grace when God gets us to the other side and the victories of God, if you will, but also in the journey that gets us there. It makes the whole thing sacred, regardless of where the road might lead. And so when David's men saw him do this, they knew exactly what he was trying to say. Such a powerful moment for them, such a powerful moment for David. And I think if we read the story correctly, it can be a powerful moment for us. It can remind us, particularly in this meantime moment in which we find ourselves. Now, granted, our meantime moment and the place we find ourselves isn't as precarious as David. I mean, we weren't sitting in a cave surrounded by an enemy army that was trying to destroy us. But we are in a place where we aren't where we want to be. We're like David. We're kind of longing, perhaps, for days gone by that were simpler before we found ourselves in this particular struggle. And like David, we don't know where the journey is going to lead. We don't know where the road is going to take us. We don't know yet how this story is going to end. And that can be a hard time. That can be a hard moment. It can be confusing. It can be challenging. It can be something that feels overwhelming. And sometimes we're not even sure how we can put one foot in front of the other. But in this moment and in this story, we can follow David's example of what he did when he was facing such overwhelming odds in that particular meantime moment in his life. We can offer everything. The journey, the sacrifice, everything we're doing now, everything we hope this leads to, we can offer it all to God. Now, let me be clear about what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we let go and let God. I find that to be an overly simplistic and unhelpful thing, really. That's not what we're talking about here, because we have a part to play here. When we talk about following David's example and turning everything over to God, what I mean by that is with intention and with faith, pouring out before God all of our hopes, all of our dreams, all of our fears, and all of our anxieties, all of our grief, and everything that we've lost. When we pour out every experience that we are having on a journey, when we offer it all to God, when we say, God, can you just take this? God does what God has done for God's people throughout the history of faith. God takes it, God takes us, God holds us in the palm of God's hand, and God reminds us that we are not alone, and that in God there is hope. And that hope isn't just about an ultimate destination. It isn't based on exactly how the journey ends up. That hope is found in the fact that no matter what happens, when we partake of, when we take the steps throughout the journey, when everything that we're doing in the midst of this time, when we do it with the right energy and the right faith and the right intentions, it becomes sacred. It becomes holy. The victory isn't just found when we get to the other side of the meantime moment. The victory is taking place on the way. Because the victory is found in the hope we have in God. Now, again, as we take this journey, and I have said this over and over again throughout this series, we worship a God who can defeat death. And if we worship a God that can defeat death, God can certainly help us defeat this moment in which we find ourselves right now. I believe to the core of my being that God has the ability to overcome every challenging circumstance that we face in life. I resonate and hear the words of the prophet Isaiah when Isaiah says, even out of the ashes, God can create beauty. I believe that with all of my heart. And the story of Jesus and his resurrection reminds us of that. But that doesn't mean that we just sit back and we wait for God. It doesn't mean that we just wonder when God is going to intervene. It means that with absolute faith in the promises, the presence, and the power of God, we step out. The same way those soldiers stepped out of that cave. And we go forward and we sacrifice ourselves and we do things for others. We care for them. We walk with them. We offer them acts of kindness and grace and hope. We do our part with the gifts that God has given us, pouring ourselves out in faith in a way that makes this whole journey sacred. Look, friends, I can't make any guarantees about where the road is going to lead us from here. I have hope, and I believe that good things will come from this journey. I believe that. I believe that to the deepest core of my spirit. But at the same time, there are no guarantees. And so as we journey, we don't have to wait until that ultimate moment. We can start living out the promises of God right now by living out the way Jesus calls us to live and love toward others. So may we be a people who live like David, not just thinking about temporary satisfactions and what makes me feel good right now. May we be a people who live like David, who pour ourselves out, who see the bigger picture, who believe in and trust in and hope in God, but know that there are steps that we've got to take as well. Friends, you have the gifts, the courage, the ability, and the faith to help get us through this meantime moment. And I can't wait until we are on the other side. My hope isn't that we will wait until that moment to begin to offer thanks and praise to God, but that we will turn the entire journey into an outpouring, a drink offering a sacred gift for those who walk with us and for the God who loves us. Amen.